Hi everybody, this is Dr. Doug. Welcome back to my YouTube channel. Today we're going to learn about a really important theorist in the field of psychotherapy, Heinz Kohut, the founder of self-psychology. This YouTube is for my students in the graduate psychology program at Antioch University, where I've been a professor for 30 years and founded the nation's first LGBT specialization in clinical psychology. But this could be also really relevant for those of you in therapy, thinking about therapy, and just really interested in the self and how you work with other people in interpersonal relationships, because all of us are really trying to figure out how to function and live to our fullest potential in our relationships. And self-psychology is all about relationships. So I'm going to be looking at my notes over here because I am Dr. Doug, but I'm going to actually be doing it in a way that is really accessible for the students and hopefully for all you viewers at home. So I'm going to give you a little bit of a brief survey about how we get from the pioneers of psychology to Heinz Kohut, K-O-H-U-T. I know most of you have never heard of him, but believe it or not, he's super, super important. So after today, you might actually get like a little, sticker that says, I love Heinz Kohut, or something cool like that. I don't know. We'll see what happens. Sorry for being a little corny, but I love this guy, and hopefully you will too. So what we're going to do now is we're going to provide a little context, just a little history, and go way, way back to the founder of modern psychoanalysis, Sigmund Freud, and go through a transit until we get to Kohut, who breaks free from Freud. So with Freud, we get the development, everyone, of the theory of the unconscious, that there's another presence inside of us that is not conscious, that is so, so cool. Of course, all religions and shamanism knew that, but it took Freud to identify that inside of us are powerful drives towards love and death. And he also suggested that there was three different agencies in the unconscious: the id, which is the monstrous part of us that wants to, murder or eat donuts in the middle of the night or have sex whenever we want to. Then there's the superego, which has our highest ideals, but for most of us is usually that inner bully, that harsh inner critic. And then the person in the middle is the ego. Ego in psychology is a good thing. It doesn't mean a bad thing. It means that part of us that lives in reality and is often rather weakened. We want to strengthen the ego. We're going to move from Freud then to his daughter, who we know was a lesbian. She was his right-hand man for most of his life. Her name was Anna Freud. She was very focused on strengthening the ego, especially for children. Most American psychoanalysis was focused on ego psychology. Then we moved to Anna's bitter, bitter enemy, Melanie Klein. And I hope you all get to learn about Melanie Klein. She's really important. She has the idea that the baby is born with two different needs: to love and to hate. And that's experienced, I know, believe it or not, in the form of a good breast who gives everything that we need, and a bad breast who withholds and wants to kill us. So the baby has developed these relationships with a good breast and a bad breast. They're split in early development. If they're split when we're an adult, that's really, really dangerous. It means that we think only in black and white. We can't also have a good argument with our partner because we get all upset and we make them a demon. So in adult psychotherapy, a lot of the times we're trying to unify the good breast and the bad breast in the patient's unconscious. But she's really, really super important and develops the field of thought called object relations, because the good breast and the bad breast in the unconscious are objects. We're the subject, other people are objects, or the objects in our mind. So that's all well and good. And then Heinz Kohut comes along. He's Jewish like all the rest of them. He lives in Chicago. He's practicing typical Freudian psychoanalysis, which means the analyst is very removed. Okay, that's how it was back in the day. The patient is maybe laying on the couch and talking, and the analyst is like Zeus on high, making interpretations. Okay, one of them. Let's say, oh, the reason that you have anxiety is because you really wanted to murder your father so you could have sex with your mother. I kid you not. And all of those early emotions have created anxiety. So that used to be the way that psychoanalysis would cure. I'm being a little exaggerational, but that's called interpretation. The students in class need to really know that's the old school way of I am the removed analyst. I'm going to tell you what I'm thinking, and I'm going to make a educated guess. A lot of us still do that. That's called an interpretation. Another interpretation is, well, lovely client, based on how you're presenting today, my guess is you're feeling anxiety. That's also still an interpretation. Heinz Kohut was doing that with his patients, and get a load of this. They were not having it. They were saying, "Ow, doctor, those interpretations, they hurt me. No, you don't see me. You're a bad therapist. You're a bad analyst. I don't give a rat's ass about your freaking interpretation." And then he began to realize, because he was actually a good-hearted person and he was a humanist, that this tradition of working with patients was actually not helpful. It was hurting them. And he began to see that it was much better if he could actually repair the injury in the session. He developed this really important tool, which hadn't been really discussed before. And the tool is called, get this, empathy. Empathy. That is how self-psychology sweeps all the old ideas away and introduces this whole new idea, which is the importance of empathy. I want to take a few steps back and say how he got there, because all of the interpretations were what's called experience distant. They had to do with you and your relationship to your mother or your father, let's say when you were 5. It had nothing to do with the fact that you and I were sitting together in this room, which is experience near. So a lot of therapists still make the mistake of talking perhaps a little too much about things that are happening in the client's world, in the client's society, in the client's memory, all well and good. But the real cure, if you're being self-psychological, is experience near. How are things going with me and my patient? Am I being empathic? And if not, how do I address that? A huge, big paradigm shift in how we think about reality, but also how we treat our patients. This is why I like this guy so very much. How he gets there is he develops this idea that every one of us has a self. That's different from an ego. That's different from an id and a superego. And that's also very different from an object relation. And it's sure as heck very different from a good breast and a bad breast. So imagine it takes thousands of years and 100 years of psychoanalysis to develop the idea that the central organizing principle in each one of us is a self. No one fully understands what that means, but we can feel it. We can feel what the self means. So another way of saying the self is this concept of narcissism. Now, Kohut developed the idea that narcissism wasn't bad. It's just that it was ill-formed. Narcissism is very similar to what we call feeling good about yourself and self-esteem and having a healthy sense of self. The reason that narcissism gets messed up has to do with how we are raised. So Kohut develops this idea that narcissism as a healthy function of the organizing self needs to be treated properly when we're really, really little. And he develops 3 different ideas that I wanted to share with all of you because you could probably connect to each one of them. The child has 3 needs. Now in self-psychology, needs. All of that has to do with our needs being met when we were young, and if they're not, we're going to act them out when we're older, which is why we sometimes push people away in relationships. The first need for the infant is that they should be able to be grand, and the mothering object or the mothering other should be able to mirror, important word, mirror the child's emerging grandiosity. Hey, look at me. Hey, look at what I did. Aren't I great? I can fly. I can do this. I can play. I can hit a baseball. Now, a lot of us probably can remember that our parents were perhaps a bit anxious about our grandiosity and often said, well, hey, don't get too big for your britches, or No, you can't really do that when you grow up. Maybe not a bad thing to do when we're 11, but not a good thing to do when we're 2. So the infant has to be able to be mirrored for their grandiosity. The next big need is the infant needs to be able to idealize one parent or the other. They need to be able to really super look up to one parent or the other. And that can cause the parent also to feel anxious too, because sometimes the parent will say, because they have not worked on their shit, not worked on themselves, that they don't deserve that idealization, and will say to the child, oh, well, no, I don't feel that good about myself. You're out of bounds there. And another important third need he developed later in life was that the infant has a need for being together with the parent, twinship, like the little boy shaving with his dad, or the little girl, I don't know, I don't want to be too gendered here, but some type of way that the child is able to be a companion, or even a colleague with the parent. Sometimes the parent will feel annoyed, irritated, be too busy, be too tired, be too stressed out, have too many kids to really spend time being an equal with the child. So those are 3 basic needs he comes up with. And the child who doesn't get those needs addressed properly will have a deficit or a hole in each one of those 3 quadrants. When there's a hole in those 3 quadrants, what happens is the self, I don't want to call the self like a block of cheddar cheese, but let's say for intents and purposes, imagine the self as a block of cheddar cheese. And if you don't get those needs properly met, the cheddar cheese is going to become Swiss cheese. It's going to get holes in those areas. So the holes in those areas that haven't been met just are never going to get met until they get met. That's why a lot of us sometimes will become narcissistic and be the center of the universe in our adult relationships, or will be friends with somebody who's a big old narcissist. It's only because they have a deficit, and that need needs to get expressed and manifest somehow. People come to therapy because they can't stand their narcissistic partners, or they're beginning to realize that they're pushing everybody away because they can't stand other people talking. Another big thing is that people may really need to idealize another person. Maybe that explains cults, for example. The need to maybe also love stars, the need to envy other people, because that need to idealize the parent wasn't met, the parent couldn't handle it. And then also you might want to see that some people in relationships can't stand to be alone. They need that constant twinship, and that may explain that those needs haven't gotten met. The problem here is that those are infantile needs, and they don't really belong in adult relationships. But if your narcissism and self-esteem is injured, you can't figure it out on your own. That's why we need therapy, and that's why we need a theory of self-psychology. So many of us have been injured in these areas around our basic needs. I think every human being in this day and age is still struggling with being needy. And the problem is that if you're needy, you're not really relating to the little infant inside of you who didn't get his needs met. We really don't want to act out too much those needs in adult relationships, but we know no better. Oftentimes people come to me in couples relationships because they're driving each other crazy, because one person's so needy, and the other person is avoidant. And the person who's needy says, well, this is my partner. I should be able to express all my needs in a safe space. And I can just feel so much empathy for that person. Because it really means is when they were a child, their mirroring needs for being grand were not met. And it's actually not appropriate, really, in that couple for that patient to be demanding that his partner be the mirroring mother, but they don't know. So that's where the therapy comes in. The major tool here is that the therapist will become the replacement parent, but the patient won't know that's happening. It just means that we then become the mirroring other, and we are working with our patients to mirror them in their grandiosity until that moment when we fail. And when we fail to do that, that creates a reenactment of the rupture. But what we can do in real time, and this is why self-psychology is such a healing method, is we can heal the rupture with the patient in real time. not through a quick apology, but through empathy. Empathy is not compassion. Empathy is not projection. Empathy is not identification, like, oh, you're another, gay Jewish guy and I really relate to you. No, that's not empathy. Empathy is you go inside and you start to connect with empathy means you go inside and you start to connect with what it feels like to be a depressed person, or to be a very anxious person, or to be a tall person, even if you're not, and you do your best to think about as memory in time where you were just as sad and upset. That's empathy. And that means that you can then walk in the shoes of another person. So empathy, which is also called vicarious introspection, helps to do the work of healing the little Swiss cheese spots that are in the patient's or the individual's self, so that cohesion and consolidation happens in those places. It's also really good for all of you out there to keep in mind that we're all pretty injured around our capacities for empathy. Empathy for our own wounds, but empathy for our partners. So rather than maybe getting into a fight with somebody or a disagreement, it might be really interesting to connect first empathically with your own injury, which is hard work, and that takes some meditation, and then to ask some questions if you have a partner who is cooperative about why they're acting the way they are acting. Did they get hurt? Did they get their needs not met? And that's really called love and relationship. So this is a wonderful method to help the students understand how to provide therapy. Empathy cures. It allows the person to become more coherent, to stand on their own 2 feet, to have healthy dependency needs, to have creativity, to have joy, and to feel healthy narcissism. So damaged narcissism becomes healthy narcissism, and that's how the therapist and the patient can work together. And also all of you folks out there who are interested in learning how to be more humanistic to yourself and to your partners, check out further YouTubes I'm going to make on this subject. Look up Heinz Kohut. Let me know if you have any questions, any concerns. And I imagine that, let me know if you have any questions and concerns, and look forward to part 2 of Heinz Kohut and self-psychology that we'll be posting soon. So thank you so much for tuning in. I really appreciate your interest. Please ask me any questions in the comment section. Have a great day, and make sure to love yourself. If you like this video, please support our channel by liking, thumbs up, and hitting the subscribe button. Thank you so much. See you next time.